Welcome back to part 2 of Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker, The Infinite Banking Strategy. This is the part of the book that I find really interesting because it's all about human behavior and the thought and how humans think. And it's not product. It's not about really anything else besides just that, how you think and how you react.
So we haven't even gotten to illustrations or ideas and concepts on how to implement this, right?
Right.
Which is what I love. That's why you can't skip the first part of the book. You can't jump to the back and say, the numbers. You got to see what's up front, because if you don't understand the why and the behaviors, the rest of the book doesn't make sense.
You're not going to understand the what and the how.
No.
Yeah, exactly right. So, and it's, that's a great point, is that you have to look at how we react to money or anything else before we want to get into illustrations. We understood the problem. That's what we talked about at the very beginning of the book, right? We have to have an understanding what the problem is, that you finance everything you do. And if you don't save enough, then you're forced to go to the traditional banking system. So it starts with the problem, which is inevitably about not saving enough. So it forces you just to go in one place. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the human behavior and what that process is going to look like. So what's your take when you hop onto page 28, if you're listening, follow along in the book? He talks about the human problem and understanding Parkinson's law. What's your take on Parkinson's law, Kyle?
This one is fascinating because it's so relatable to people. Parkinson's law, he says, work expands to meet the time envelope allowed. We're literally this comes up
every day,
often, especially in business, right? If you give yourself 30 days to do a project, you're going to finish it on day 29. And so
day 30
or day 30. Okay, you're really abusing Parkinson's law. But if you can condense time frames, what ends up happening is you end up doing it quicker. So by nature, if we have 5 years to do it, let's do it in 5 years. But if you can ask yourself better questions on how could we take this and do it in 1 year, 6 months, whatever it is, your mind goes to work for you. And now you start thinking of how to actually do that. And so it's important to play that game in your favor versus doing what most people do, is they're just going to let it ride as long as possible. Yeah. Turn in the project the day of.
So why is that important when we're talking about Nelson's book and the infinite banking concept? Why is it important to understand what impact that has on us? I look at it and I say, and again, I've had clients say, well, I'll think about it and I'll get to it someday. Well, it never comes around. Someday.
Yeah. What is that date?
Yeah. What's that end date? So I think, why he brings that up and why he highlights it here, and he just spends a paragraph on it, is like, you have to understand that it is a human behavior that's always going to be there. And so everything we do is like, well, I'm going to implement this, or I'll put together the rules sometime down the road. Well, you've left it infinite to when that's going to happen. So guess when it's going to happen? Never.
Right.
So, as you go through and as you start to grow in your understanding of this, just be thinking about how you can implement it in your family, how your family can take advantage of using this process. And if you can say, well, I want to do it by X date, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you have that date set. It's probably more than you've ever imagined you could accomplish in that short amount of time.
Right.
So I think he puts it in there just to kind of get you to think, like, as a business owner, I have to make sure that we have some time set that we want to have this done, have some goals, have some periods that we want to have success measured for our banking system.
It's a wonderful law to be disciplined enough to follow.
Right.
And have work in your favor. Let's go to the next one. A luxury enjoyed becomes a necessity.
Yeah.
Man, oh man.
So I got to tell you a quick story. I bought a Jeep Wrangler for my wife years ago for her birthday. My son hops in, he's probably 6-7 years old. He looks around and he's like, Dad, what are these? It's the window cranks, right? He's only experienced, the automatic windows in my pickup. So that's all he knew. So he didn't know what that was. And so now, fast forward a couple of years, I go to get a new truck. He's like, Dad, we need seat heaters in the back. We got them up front. We live in North Dakota, you need seat heaters.
Yeah.
Well, you live in Arizona here, you need seat coolers.
You need bun coolers.
Bun coolers, right. So, but that's a luxury. Once you've had it, you're never going to be without it again.
It's very difficult to go back.
Very difficult to go back.
That's right.
So something seen and learned is very difficult to unsee and unlearn.
And so what we're not saying is, I'm always in favor of abundance. If you want something, ask yourself, how can you buy an asset to fund or pay for whatever it is that you want, right? Play some games, some healthy games with yourself. But just know, when you go to back massagers in your truck, I'm never buying another truck without back massagers. I'll tell you that.
I've never experienced that, but I guess on the ride, maybe we'll give it a try.
We'll turn that one on for you on the way to the airport.
No, don't do that because then I'll want it.
Okay, fair enough.
So expenses rise to equal income. Boy, now, have you ever experienced this?
Oh yeah, I think everyone does.
Right.
Think about it. You work hard, you get that raise, whatever it is. What's the first thing you do? Go get your boat, go get whatever. It seems like you don't end up saving more money. Everyone just increases their lifestyle as the income goes up. So they don't get in a better financial situation. They just have more stuff. Right. They're in the same amount of debt. They save the same savings rate. They just have more stuff now. So when you're real careful that doesn't scale like he's saying here.
Yeah, exactly. So he makes the point too, is like, this is just something that has to be recognized. The reason why we're going over this is you have to recognize that these are human behaviors. Are you ever going to not have those? No, but you can address them and you can beat them just from the standpoint of, hey, I understand what they are. Let me try to find a solution to that so I don't succumb to them all the time. And that's really why he puts it in the book, because our habits, if it's in our personal lives, in our business lives, or in our banking lives, all come back down to that. Right.
And he doesn't just put it in his book, but he says, it doesn't have to be this way, but it is. Parkinson's law must be overcome daily. If you cannot do so, then just go ahead and give up.
Yeah.
You are destined to become a slave. So when we're teaching and, we're saying you need to have a strong saving strategy before you start this process, do not abuse this system. You got to have some disciplines in place. Basically, if you can't beat Parkinson's law, you have no business starting this process.
That's a great point.
And honestly, you've no business doing anything great, because if you can't beat that, he's 100% right. I love that the truth is in here. Yeah. If you can't do that, you will live a very mediocre, average life forever. Accept it. You can't do it if you don't change your behaviors. Now, why do more financial strategies that we hear out there, they don't start with that? They start with, I've got this product that'll change your life. That is not the problem. No. The problem is us. We've got to change ourselves. We need to work on ourselves. And if we can change our behaviors, now we have a legitimate shot at doing something.
Right. And it's so nice because he's laying it out there. He's making you recognize it, and now you have a choice. And the point he makes here is if you can just whip Parkinson's law and do nothing else in your life, if you can say, I understand Parkinson's law, I'm going to fight those things, I'm going to do nothing else, you're going to win the money game by default, probably.
So let's put it this way. What's the average savings rate across America right now?
Well, they tell us 10%, but what is it really?
Less than 5.
Less than 5.
So when we're teaching our seminars and we've got clients that are saving a minimum of 10, you are doing twice what the average person in America is doing just by saving 10% of your income. By the way, that's like a magical number. If you read any financial book, they all tell you the same thing. Pay yourself first. Whatever it is, it's always 10%. Minimum.
Yeah, let's talk about minimum for a second. We have a conversation where we say you should be saving between 10 and 30%.
It should be closer to 30.
Right.
But
and again,
you might have to start with 10.
Start with 10, but why are people so resistant to that number?
Because of Parkinson's law.
Because of Parkinson's law.
Their expenses rose to meet their income. The luxuries they have, they cannot do without them anymore. And they really don't hustle hard enough to actually get things done. They'll take the longest time, most expensive things. They do not have the disciplines in place. So that number seems so high to them.
Right. And part of that too is kind of what they've been conditioned to think a little bit too, right? So if somebody says save 30%, what do people automatically think? Oh, I need to save 30% into my 401k, my retirement savings, whatever it is. And then that money's locked up and gone forever. So they're fearful that, gosh, if I put it away, I'm not going to see that money for the next 30 years. Why? I just can't save that money.
That's a good point. So is it the savings rate or is it the savings environment that is the problem?
I would, Nelson talks about the environment, and we'll get into that a little bit too. Find a better environment.
When we're saving into our whole life policies, that cash is liquid and available.
It's usable.
If we need it for something, which is why we use it as a savings vehicle.
Yep. Now, we still have rules set up around it, but the point is that find a better environment that doesn't take the money out of your control. Because if you put it into a tax sheltered account or investment or whatever, it's gone. It's out of your control. But if you control it, then that 30% number becomes a lot less scary.
Let's hop over to Willie Sutton's law.
Who's Willie Sutton?
Wasn't he a bank robber?
He was a bank robber. So
you grew up with Willie Sutton, right?
Yeah, I think it was back in the 30s. So Willie Sutton was a bank robber, and they came up to him and said, hey, Willie, why do you rob banks? You know, his answer was, that's where the money's at.
That's a smart guy.
I mean, who said criminals are dumb, right? So, but he was talking about theft, right? So theft is the very first time and labor saving invention that they ever had.
Why work if you could just go steal someone
Right.
else's work?
So, but who steals? I mean, who's conditionally stealing or routinely stealing from you?
Are you referring to the government, Wade?
No, I would never say that. This is not recorded anywhere. There are people out there organized with a whole army to come and get your money. And if you don't,
we're talking about the IRS. Okay.
if they don't give it up, they might throw you in jail or shoot you. So that's
So, but let's talk about that, right? Because I think Nelson says government is not capable of producing anything. It gets all its sustenance from the productive elements of society, from us.
yeah.
Like the government's not. I mean, it's definitely inefficient. I think most people would agree with that statement, but they're not stupid,
No, not at all.
right? They're going to live off of what we're building, and I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, especially if you start really educating yourself on the tax code and how to use it to your advantage, which most people just never take the time to do. But this whole conversation of taxes, because he's referring to his book that, taxes is a form of theft. They're just coming to get what we're working for, right? And he says when taxation becomes onerous to the point where government officials sense rebellion, they always resort to exceptions to the rules.
Yeah.
So they're not going to, tax us to death, but kind of, I mean, it feels kind of like that right now.
Right up to the edge. They just want to keep you alive.
It's pretty close.
Right.
And this whole conversation on taxes is very interesting, especially with the government created plans to give you the loophole, if you will.
Yeah. Think about that for just 1 second. Who created the problem?
Right.
The government. Who created the solution? The government.
Mm-hmm.
Who controls the playbook and makes all the rules? The government.
Right.
Do you want to play in that field?
No.
So why do we?
Exactly. Because that's what we've been conditioned to think.
Store your money in a 401k. Again, I'm going to go back to that, right? People don't want to save it there because it's locked up because the government put rules around it. Versus educating us. Again, I don't want the government to educate me on anything. Allowing us to educate ourselves, and again, that's on us, to find a better way.
Yeah.
That's why he put this chapter in the book.
Well, what's interesting too is, how I think when I'm having conversations with prospects, Wade, and, I'm saying, what kind of assets do you have? Any investments? They say, yes, I got a 401k. So, okay, tell me about your 401k. And it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a 401k. Is it the best vehicle? I don't think so. Is it going to do what people think? I also don't think so. But that's a good habit to have is saving money somewhere.
100%.
Very commendable. But when you start asking good questions around it, I think that's what it gets disturbing for me. So if we say, what do you like about your 401k? Well, I get a tax deduction. Interesting. Why do you need a tax deduction? They're like, well, are you crazy, Kyle? Because taxes are too high. Okay. Why are taxes too high? I don't know, because the government has them too high. Okay. Who built your 401k and sponsored it? The government. Are we starting to see the picture here? If they wanted to give us a break, they could just lower taxes. That would make sense to me. But instead, they create this product and they push it hard.
Yeah. So
hard that there's $7 trillion sitting in 401ks right now. That's a lot of savings that Americans don't have access to.
And who controls the rules of those?
Not us.
The government. So they do it not for anything more than just control, right? They're controlling the rules.
Does that make you nervous?
It makes me completely nervous. I mean, we have to follow rules. We understand that. But when it's about control and control of our money, because if you control somebody's money, this goes back to Willie Sutton, right? He went and stole from where the money was at. Well, the government's coming to steal from us. Call it steal, call it taxation, whatever you want to call it. They're coming to us. And again, they've created this system, this program where you can put your money into it.
Right.
And then now they set the rules, and now you have to give up control. And that's the part that probably disturbs me the most is like, who do you want to be responsible for your life? Do you want the government to be responsible for it, or do you want to be responsible for it?
At our wealth seminars, we talk about this principle of like really what it means to be American. If you go back to our American heritage and culture, we're an independent people.
Yeah.
What happened to our self-reliance? What happened to our ability to think and be entrepreneurial. To me, a 401k violates all of those principles. You're going to give up your destiny and put it in the control of someone else who I think 100% will abuse it when the time comes. Taxes going up or down.
Look at the debt. I don't see it going down. I don't know.
They have to stop spending money, which I don't think they have the discipline or the habits to do that. And if we're getting those tax deferrals, okay, that's the word in the 401k. It's not a deduction. It's a deferral, which means later. Later makes me very nervous when the people controlling it can't stop spending money. When it's time, they could change that rule and go get that. Yeah. And it's why me personally, Wade, I don't want anything to do with government-sponsored programs, and neither will the families coming after me.
Right. If you think about it, do you have a rich uncle? Do you have an uncle that has lots of money?
Do I have an uncle with lots of money?
Yeah. Well, imagine you did.
Okay.
Imagine you
I
did.
don't think I do.
Imagine he wrote you a check for $50,000. You'd be excited about that.
I wish it was more, but
okay, let's make it $100,000.
All right, now we're getting started.
Okay, so he's gonna write you a check for $100,000, and he says, "Hey, don't worry about the terms and conditions of when you're gonna pay it back or the interest rate. I'll tell you that 20 years down the road." Would you cash that check?
No.
Think about what that is. That's exactly what a 401k is. They give you a little bit of nugget of be able to deduct it off your taxes today, but you have no idea what the terms and conditions are 20 or 30 years from now when you have to pull that money out.
That is a dangerous bet to be placing.
I mean, you talk about certainty versus uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty there.
Yeah.
So what's a solution to that? I mean, we've talked a lot about, there's a real problem there with people saving money where they're saving. We're talking about the environment. Think about an environment where it's done between like-minded individuals. This is the real key, right? So in his book, Nelson says, economic problems are best solved by people freely contract with one another with limited government, to enforce those contracts. So what he's saying there is we need to engage in a contract with like-minded individuals. Eliminate the government, except for the standpoint of the ability to enforce it, but that's all they need to do. And we get into a contract. You and I are in a contract together, Kyle. I have a contract with One America. You have a contract with One America. That means we have a contract together.
And that's a strong mutually owned carrier that we use for infinite banking. If you're listening to this and you don't know who One America is.
Yeah, that's a strong mutual insurance company. And it's a contract that Kyle and I have because it's a mutual company. And so we're doing this with like-minded individuals. And so when we think about it from that standpoint, we are now in this together from that standpoint. But we're not doing it out of force. We're doing it out of desire to solve a problem. And that's the big difference. Is like you and I are working together to solve a problem, whatever that might be. We want access to cash. We want to make sure that when we graduate from this world, our family is taken care of. All those things that are issues, but we're entering into a contract versus hopping into a deduction or hopping into a system that's made up to solve a problem that the government created.
Exactly. So. And he says the best tool to use is dividend paying whole life insurance because it's been around for 200 years. It stood the test of time. It's not compulsory. It's not a government sponsored idea. It preceded the income tax idea by a long time. It's private property. And the only people who care about others that are dear to them participate in this idea. What a great group of people to be associated with in business.
Yeah.
That to me sounds like what it means to be American.
Yeah.
That's what we did. That's why we left to get away from government, right?
Yeah.
And we've kind of gotten ourselves back into that mess. I mean, I think it serves a purpose to a point, but I think it's gone pretty far to the point where they've created so many problems and now they're creating solutions to the problems they created. And all we're saying, Wade, and what Nelson said in his book is you don't have to participate in that game that's being played.
Choose not to play. Yep. 100%. That's why I ask you if all the rules are made by the government and they can change the rules anytime you want, why do you want to play in that game? Choose not to. Go find a better way.
That is an option.
Yep. And find other people that want to do the same thing you're looking for and get in contract with those people, like-minded individuals.
Let's hop over to the golden rule, Wade, on page 31.
Sure.
We all know that the golden rule, those who have the gold make the rules, right? And, one of the things I have highlighted on this page is, and this to me is really what we're trying to address across America, part of our Factum mission. He says the common man has become so infatuated with living for today that the importance of saving or creating capital is all but lost value. The American savings rate is miserably low. At the time of this writing, it's been negative. So as a result, someone else must provide the capital that is necessary to sustain our way of life. Because we cannot save money as a culture, we are forced to go to entities like banks for our financing needs.
And then what happens when you're forced to go to banks to finance your needs?
You have to play by their rules, and they get the bulk of all of your hard work in the form of interest payments over a lifetime, sometimes multiple lifetimes, because if we don't stop and change the trajectory we're on, our kids are born into that same mess.
Right. You're passing debt from one generation to the next. I mean, it's not even the debt the debt's awful, but it's the habits of being in debt, the comfortableness of being in debt. Think about that for a second. We've normalized it so much that everybody thinks you can't grow unless you get into debt.
And have you ever heard debt be associated with slavery?
Yeah.
Like,
there's indentured servants all the time that owed money to people. Indentured servant is just a nicer way to saying you're a slave to somebody for a certain period of time.
Exactly. So if you think about that, we're born in this perpetual debt cycle, and it is a form of slavery. We're slaves to the banks. That's really what's happening.
Yeah.
And why is it so critical that we increase the amount we're saving, Wade, and then change the savings environment? This is why we encourage everyone that's working with us to be saving between 10 and 30%, because most Americans are saving 5 or less. And if we can change how much we're saving and then get it into a better savings environment, this is why we use Whole Life. What happens when that savings account, that policy, has a decent amount of cash value available? What starts to find us? Opportunity. So if you go over to the right side of page 31, he says, when you have a large amount of cash on hand, all sorts of good opportunities will appear.
Yeah.
And you can also negotiate very favorable purchase prices. So many of life's problems would disappear if this understanding was generally accepted and practiced widely among the population.
Yeah.
We love to go to Truth Concepts with Todd Langford every year. And he always says it this way. You understand what a black swan event is?
Yeah.
A very catastrophic, life-altering event that will happen. We just cannot predict when.
Right.
And those typically happen like every 7 to 10 years, a market shift, a market crash. And I graduated high school in 2007. 2008 rolled around, the market tanked. My family lost everything, literally everything. That was scary, being the second oldest of 11 siblings, and I was 19. Now, why did my family go from doing well to being obliterated? Because we had no savings, no liquidity. But from years 2010, 11, 12, there were people who made fortunes here in Phoenix. Why did they make fortunes when others got obliterated? They had access to savings.
Yeah.
Savings is, to me, the sexiest conversation that exists because it lays the groundwork for everything you'll do in the future.
And if you don't have proper savings, a little bit earlier in the book, Nelson says capital is a responsibility and should be treated with great respect. When he says capital, he's just talking about savings and money, right? People have very little respect for those dollars, and so they don't want liquidity. They don't want to have that sexy conversation like you're talking about. But it truly is the foundation to long-term success.
So let's put it this way. One of the reasons why I think Americans save so little money, one, they're uneducated. We just don't take the time to learn about money. Two, the savings environments that most Americans save in are so inefficient. Why would you save? Right. The banks don't pay you. They don't give you any benefit for leaving your money there.
Yeah. Well,
so part of it is if you can just shift, like the reason our clients love whole life insurance is because their money does a lot of things in that policy.
Right.
It's protection. It's private. It's always growing. It never gets smaller, right?
Right.
You can leverage it using the flexible loan provision to jump on opportunity. Like you get all of these benefits. And if you're going to go build a home, Wade, what's the first thing you do to build a home?
Solid foundation.
You need a foundation. Now, do you want the strongest foundation or do you want a weak foundation?
Well, if I plan to live there and be the rest of my life, I want a strong foundation.
So to me, it's like you better be saving a decent amount of money to lay that foundation. It better be strong, which is why we put it in whole life insurance, because the guarantees. There's no stronger foundation for our savings as an American people. Now, okay, that's a home. How about if you wanted to build a skyscraper, Wade? What kind of foundation do you need for that? Same one?
Yeah. No, you need an immense foundation.
You need an immense foundation.
You need to go all the way down to bedrock.
So if I've got someone and they're like, I want to make $1 million in my lifetime, great. You're probably okay with 10% savings rate. But if I'm working with someone that's like, I want to have $100 million net worth, okay, that changes the conversation. You better have a foundation that's strong enough to protect that on the way up. And if you don't have your foundation set, you could have 10 to 15 years of phenomenal returns. If you have one leak in your foundation, that could put you under. You can't, like, it's got to be a different conversation. But guess what? That all starts with savings. Isn't that something?
It is. It's so true. It starts with savings. And, you're talking about the environment. Why do we like whole life, right? So one of the reasons I look at it and I say, because right now I had somebody say, I can go out and get go to the bank and get 4% or 5% or whatever the number is. But how long is that, right? So the problem is that uncertainty of time. Right? When I'm talking time, I'm talking the rest of my life. Hopefully that's a long time.
Can you go longer than that?
Definitely could.
So
with a policy, you could.
When we're saving into whole life, like you get that interest rate for life.
For life. And it might be my son's life if I own a policy on him. If I'm putting money there, it's going to be hopefully a very, very, very long time. Or if you got grandkids, it's the rest of their life.
That's a powerful asset.
It's a powerful asset. And the part is it's guaranteed to have that return forever.
Forever. That's a long time.
Where somebody says, well, I can get 4% in at the bank right now because they have a 3-month CD or a 6-month CD or whatever it is. Okay, what are you going to do after that when the interest rates are back down? Do you know where the interest rate's going to be 6 months from now, 10 months from now, 3 years from now? You have no idea, no certainty. How do you build anything with no certainty?
Yeah. And, whole life always gets compared gross to net anyways.
Yeah.
I'm getting 5% of my bank. 5% gross or 5% net?
Yeah.
When we talk interest rates with whole life, it's always net numbers.
Right.
It's the truth. It's what you're actually going to have. Huge difference.
Yep, exactly right. So we've talked a little bit about the golden rule. There's a lot more in some of these chapters, and I would encourage you just to read it, reread it. Reach out to an IBC practitioner if you want to have a good in-depth conversation on any of these chapters, because there's so much to be unpacked here. We're just going over some of the highlights that we have in our books, but I could talk about this for, Nelson says it's a 10-hour course.
You should be reading this once a year minimum.
Yeah.
If you're participating in this system.
Yeah, and if you're serious about wanting to control the banking function, because this is the roadmap.
It's all about education.
Yep. So, and this is where, I guess it's probably proper timing. We're going to talk a little bit about the arrival syndrome. What does that mean to you, Kyle? What does the arrival syndrome mean to you?
Well, let's take it right from Nelson's mouth. The arrival syndrome, he says, this phenomenon probably limited the achievements of mankind more than anything else. When this thing infects us, we stop growing, stop learning. We literally rot. We turn off or tune out the ability to receive inspiration because we already know all there is to know. It literally breaks my heart, Wade, when I'm chatting with individuals who are doing well and they say just that. Nah, I'm good. I don't need to come to one of your classes. I don't need to read that book. We're doing pretty good. I'm like, good is the enemy of great.
Yep.
And I never will succumb to I did this for 90 days. Okay. I used to have the arrival syndrome when I was 24 and I thought I knew everything because I was selling Index Universal Life at that time for 10 months before I got educated by an orthodontist. And, my wife kept bugging me, hey, Dr. Dykman wants you to come down to one of his classes. And I thought, what is this orthodontist going to teach me about life insurance? I'm selling IULs. This is it. Like, I know everything. Well, I finally went down there. And here's young 24-year-old Kyle with no money. And it's me sitting in a room of like 25 people. Everyone in there is a multi-million-dollar dentist, orthopedic surgeon, orthodontist, and then it's me, right? And there's a good room to be in. And he's teaching right out of this book. And I'm watching everything he's done with his practice. And I'm like, this is what I've been looking for. I'm like, what product are you using to do this? He said, you're not going to like it. Whole life insurance. I said, don't you know that's the worst one? And then he gave me a couple books to read. I got educated. I said, I don't know anything. So I went back to the guys I was working with. I said, what do you guys really know about whole life insurance? Oh, garbage. It's a black and white TV compared to color TVs we have nowadays. And right then I knew they also didn't know anything. So I had to call a bunch of people that I had sold policies to previously, apologize. I didn't know what I was doing. We might want to shift this right now. Super uncomfortable. It honestly sucked. It was very embarrassing. And so that set me off on this path. And from that point on, it was like, I will always show up and try to get something out of a conversation. You can go anywhere. Even if you've been to the same seminar 3, 4, 5 times, you can get something out of that class if you show up looking for it. But to succumb to the arrival syndrome thinking we know it all, one of the most dangerous things you could ever do.
Yeah. It is the glass full mentality, right? My glass is so full, I can't add any more to it because I just have so much knowledge and understanding. I think about, and we all run across this in our own lives. I mean, you just gave a story. I think about it from the standpoint of before I read Nelson's book, I thought I knew the insurance world. I had been in an insurance world for 15 years. I knew it all, right? The problem is if you're the smartest man in the room, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So people that have the rival syndrome always want to be the smartest man in the room because they want to tell everybody how bright they are. The people that are going to grow and are going to blow past everybody are going to say, I want to surround me with the very brightest people in the world because I know there's always something to learn. There's got to be more to learn because other words, think about that. Can you learn everything there is to know in this world in your lifetime?
No way.
But if you have that, I know what that is, or without even reading a book or even having a conversation, some people say, what's your perfect client look like, Wade? I'm like, somebody that's, that's teachable, somebody that's willing to have an open mind. That's all we're talking about. Having an open mind, think a little differently. That's the perfect client.
And it'll serve you. So real quick story on that. When I was working with my first mentor for the first 4 years of my career, I would show up to every presentation he ever did. If he ever flew out to the Phoenix area, I was there. And I had seen him present what was called his introduction presentation hundreds of times. It was always the same, but you always got something different if you showed up looking for it. And there was one particular time that he was teaching like a Friday class I came to. And then, so they did like an intro presentation and then like an advanced one, the latter part of Friday. And then Saturday morning, they had one more class and it was another intro presentation. Saturday morning, I showed up, Monty showed up, and this 18-year-old kid that I brought with me. No one else showed up. It was in Scottsdale. No one. It was just the three of us. And so my old mentor was there and his largest client was there. Now this guy is worth like hundreds of millions of dollars. So we didn't even do the intro presentation. We just sat there for a couple hours and he just taught us. This guy that's worth hundreds of millions, his investing strategies, his experience with banking, because they're like third generation banking family.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm so glad I showed up to learn something new because this is the experience I just got. That's what happens when you're relentless about education and like you will never succumb. Everyone else said this is going to be the same thing. And it might have been, but we showed up anyways. And look at the experience that Monty and I had through that.
When you say third generation banking, you mean third generation private banking.
Yeah. So his dad started this process, left him a bunch of money. They exploded it. And then his daughter now is the third generation who's like 5 years older than me.
And they're successful with it.
Unbelievably.
And you learn tremendous lessons from that individual.
What would you pay to sit with someone worth that kind of money?
Yeah.
And I got that just because I showed up repeatedly.
Showed up and had an open mind. Yeah. Because again, it comes back down to if you're not willing to show up, at least with a thought like, hey, I might learn something, then why even go?
Right.
And then if that's going to be your attitude, then really that's going to be the end of your life. Because you get to the point where you're full of knowledge, you don't want to know anything else, you might as well just die.
Wade, you still learn new stuff about infinite banking?
Every day.
Isn't that something? This is why you have to keep coming to our seminars, our deep dives. You got to revisit the course. You got to read this book every year. Yeah. You have to commit to just growing. Growing doesn't stop.
Yeah. And growing has to be intentional. I mean, you and David had a deep dive last night. I was sitting watching it. I was in your broom closet, by the way, watching it. And I was like, I learned things. I'm like, holy smokes. That's great. I didn't know that. And I'm like, that's where my mind goes. Because I've heard that presentation. I mean, I've been in infinite banking for 15 years or more. But doesn't mean I know it all. Quite frankly, that's
You
the scary
shouldn't
part.
ever know it all.
No, I don't want to know it all.
Right.
It's got to be the point where I want to learn more than I've ever learned in the past.
Yeah.
So anyhow, the rival syndrome is very dangerous. It is it really is the death of a lot of great opportunities because you're not willing to say, I think I can know more. Somebody's there to teach me more. And then purposefully going out and searching for those people that can teach you more. That's the real key. So, at the end of that chapter, there's a quote in there. It came from a Fortune article on economic value added, but he says, if people understood what's going on, what's really happening, they'll know what to do. So let me repeat that. If you understand what's really going on, you'll know what to do. So, that's a powerful statement because that's what I see that as my job. I'm here to help people understand what's really going on, what's really happening, so they can be educated enough to know what to do.
Yeah.
Versus me telling them what to do.
That's a big part of why we educate. We educate to empower people. We don't want to be the financial advisors in your life. I don't want to be the gatekeeper for anyone. You got to come to me and I'll manage your money for you. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just don't want that role. I want the people that are in my community to be able to think for themselves because I 100% believe their unique abilities will generate them more wealth than I could ever help them generate. I can teach them how to be a banker, but they've got to go do the banking process with their own thinking. Yep. And one thing I'll just say to Wade on page 35, Nelson says, we notice that many people we're teaching are still caught up in the posture that this is a matter of a function of interest rates. Such a big one. Well, what's the rate of return? And this is a fatal error, he says. It has to do with recognizing where money is flowing to and the failure of charging interest to your banking system for the things you're using. Anytime you can cut out the payment of interest to others, a conventional bank, and direct that same market rate of interest to an entity that you own and control, here's the big part, which is subject to minimal or no taxation, you have improved your situation. That's all this process is. There's a flow of money. How much of it are you controlling? Then there's interest payments and costs that are leaving you. If you can just redirect that back to an entity that you own and control, it's subject to minimal taxation, you are better off than you were previously. Has nothing to do with rates of return.
Right. And that has nothing to do with what's the interest rate I'm getting on my policy or what's that has no part of the conversation. The part of the conversation is, do I have capital? Am I putting it to work? Would I be paying fees and interest to somebody else? Yes. Well, then I should be paying that back to the entity that I own and control. That's all that's really saying.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm going to just touch on one thing here. Nelson doesn't mention in the book, but I came across this one time, and there's 3 stages of a new idea. Now, this isn't really a new idea. This is actually probably comes back from the 30s and 40s and 50s, but it's kind of a regenerated new idea because there's a lot of talk about it. But there's 3 stages of an idea, right? There's ridicule, there's active resistance, there's having it become self-evident. And I think about that with Nelson's idea, right? He was ridiculed. Anybody that says, well, I'm going to do privatized banking, I'm going to do becoming your own banker, I'm going to put my money in a whole life policy. How many people are ridiculed for that? All the time.
We do. Every day.
all day long, people are being ridiculed for it. But I see it less and less to what now I actually start to see active resistance, where I see organizations coming out and speaking. It's like, this is a terrible idea. And now large corporations are saying, well, you shouldn't do that, or, whatever it is, because they start to feel like their control is being lost. Their grip on you and your freedom is being lost. And so they're going to start to actively resist that. And then it's going to get to the point where we're all like looking around like, well, of course, this is self-evident. Why isn't everybody doing this? Well, it's obvious. I mean, everybody should be doing this. And so I see this thought process getting almost in that 3rd stage.
But we're right there.
So many people are like, they don't care about being ridiculed. That they're way past that. They don't care about the fact that some people are trying to hold them back because, the banks don't want to lose your money and lose the control that they have over you. Now they're getting to the point where you're silly not to do this. Yeah. And we're there.
We are there, yeah. Especially like in the real estate space. You're going to see the whole life conversation pop up like you can't even imagine in the next 10 years. It's out there now.
It's out there now.
People are waking up. They're understanding. They want the benefits that whole life provides. And yeah, we are in that phase. It's an exciting time to be in this business. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, it's going to explode, and we're going to be helping it get there.
Absolutely.
So, looking forward to it. So, just the last little piece on this, Nelson talks about some structure in the policies. There's a lot of buzz around people saying, well, I should use universal life. I'm going to kind of throw this back at you a little bit, because I know, that's what you promote all the time is universal life.
Yeah, that's my go-to.
Okay, we're just kidding. But you did start. You mentioned it earlier. You started in that realm.
I did, but I did not understand the qualities and benefit differences between those two assets. So when people tell me, because I talk to a lot of insurance agents, and their go-to is always like, why do you like whole life? Because of the guarantees? I'm like, yes, that's why you buy it. Why do you like those sunglasses? Because they keep the sun out of your eyes? Like, what are we talking about right now? And it's not that they are inherently bad or whatever, they're trying to mislead, but they just don't know what they don't know. And when you look at the qualities, and now Nelson talks about it in the previous page, he says, he's talking about the animal, like when the insurance companies built this product, Whole Life, right? The animal they created had much more in common with banking than it did life insurance. When you look at the proportions of the whole activity, it's obvious that the banking qualities with this whole life insurance policy become much greater than the death benefit quality. So a better name would have been a banking system with a death benefit thrown in for good measure. And so the whole idea of the infinite banking concept started with the realization that there's a huge amount of nonsense going on in the marketplace because the misclassification of things. And this is where insurance agents get it wrong. They say whole life or universal life or IULs. That's not the conversation. Your conversation is guarantees versus whatever is in that IUL.
I would pose to you to say certainty with whole life versus uncertainty.
That's it. And so when you classify those properly, why do we like whole life for infinite banking? Because it is the perfect foundational asset because of the guarantees. Has nothing to do with rates of return. And that's the only way that most insurance agents try to come at us is the rate of return is much higher on an IUL, so it must be better. It could be higher with way more risk, which is why we can't put it at the foundation. So you have to classify an IUL or universal life for what it is. It's an investment. Yeah. Whole life is not. As soon as you can make that distinction, you stop talking about numbers and you start talking about qualities and benefits. I want that at my foundation. If I wanted to get a higher rate of return, I was willing to take more risk as an investment. Would I look at an IUL? Maybe. Depends on how much I know about it. Yeah. But you got to compare it to other investments like real estate, 401k, crypto, anything in the investment space. But whole life insurance is not an investment.
No. And that goes back to the previous chapter too, right? Where, Nelson says, if you understand what's happening, what's going on, you'll know what to do. Most people don't understand what those products are. Even sales agents don't, or agents don't have an idea what the product is or how they work. And if they do, are they misguided? I really believe is like most people are good at their core.
Yeah.
But they don't understand what these things are. And until you've lived a life seeing what these things do and what they don't do, what kind of expectations are they created and that are never fulfilled? That's the problem with these products. And again, I'm on a soapbox a little bit, but it is so true that when we look at these things, it's not fulfilling our purpose. It's not giving us what we need, which is certainty and guarantee at the time that we need it. And if you,
how do you put a dollar amount on guarantees, Wade?
You can't, because there's
what would you pay for that?
You'd pay anything to get the guarantee that you're looking for.
Yes.
And so why is it an interest rate conversation when it comes to a product that's got guarantee and certainty versus a product that has uncertainty? And that's the whole point.
You cannot put those in the same light,
right,
and try to compare them.
And it's universal life of any chassis, IUL, VUL, interest sensitive. I've seen them all. And all I'll say is that they're all built in the same chassis, and they're all, unless you absolutely know what you're doing with them, I'll even back that up. I think even if you know what you're doing with them, they're very dangerous.
You got to be careful.
You got to be careful, because like any other tool, if you don't know how to use it, if you don't know how the inner workings work, it's going to come back and bite you.
You need to focus on your behaviors as an investor if you want to mitigate that risk in the investment. So if you don't know about IULs, you can't explain them, you can't explain what could happen, I wouldn't be buying them.
Right.
So if you're going to purchase one, compare it to the other investment classes you actually know and understand, and then make your decision from there. We're not saying don't buy any of those, but you have to be able to compare it to other asset classes that even in the same realm. And from there, you have to look at it from your own perspective.
And ask yourself, why are you buying it?
What's the purpose?
What's the purpose? And does it serve that purpose?
Does it fit your investing criteria?
Right. All those things have to be asked before just going, oh, it's got a better rate of return than whole life. Because it's like comparing, I use the analogies like, how many bananas are in the color blue? Has no part of the conversation.
How many bananas are in the color blue?
Right.
That's how asinine comparing interest rates between those two products are. It makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
Someone that understands and is educated will look at you like, what did you just ask?
How many bananas are in the color blue?
Right.
So when somebody comes up and says, hey, I got this IUL and it's so great, I'm like, hey, that's great. What are you trying to accomplish with it? What's the purpose?
Yeah, what's the goal there?
Yeah. So do you want certainty? Do you want uncertainty? That's the conversation.
That's it.
So
let's do quick recap. Basically, for part 2, if you can't beat Parkinson's law and get those behaviors under control, start saving money more than the average American, you have no business starting infinite banking. You do not belong in this process. And we hate to say it, but you're going to be a slave. You will work so hard in your life and you will just let the banks take all of that hard work and that interest that could be yours. You'll just let them take it. But at least you know it's happening now. Part of this is the self-awareness.
So let's put a little light out there for people that are like, I haven't beat Parkinson's law. It doesn't mean you will never beat it.
It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable.
It's going to be extremely uncomfortable. Let's lay it out there. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be tough. But again, is it worth the effort? Is it worth the pain to get to the point where you have the control and the freedom that you're looking for?
100%.
Right. So it can be done. This is the roadmap. Start controlling that. And then once you have that, then start applying these principles. Well, cool. Well, that was good. We're going to cut into the next chapter in our next podcast. So thanks for joining us. And we'll see you there.